All right, me. It is, it's like July 8th, I think. And today, I finally finished reading Henry James's Turn of the Screw. This thing is only like 80 something pages, and it took me forever. It took like 4 days to read. It is the classic. Sometimes you can read 300 pages in a day, 400 pages in a day, and sometimes it takes you a week to read 20. Yeah, which is a real shame because I certainly went into this book having pretty high expectations. I knew that this was a fairly well beloved, well-renowned ghost story piece of literature, and it just did nothing for me. And because of that, I did become pretty quickly disinterested, and therefore it was not something I was constantly going, I gotta go read, which is a shame. It really is. But yeah, it is a ghost story, it is a supernatural story, and it is very much designed to be this gothic horror story, which are all very enjoyable things in a lot of ways, right? But this specifically, I don't know if it just didn't resonate with me. I don't know what it was. But the story itself is, you are hearing this story secondhand. That's the way it is framed. And then the story itself is this governess who is put in charge of children, and then starts seeing ghosts, and is in full belief that the children are acting poorly because they are being possessed by these ghosts who are former caretakers of the property that spend a lot of time with the children. And then the children end up basically just denying that they see the ghosts. And the ending is, the girl is supposedly going to go tell the uncle, who is actually fully in charge of them, that the new caretaker is terrible, but then also that it ends with our boy Miles dying in our governess's arms after the governess attempts to stop him from seeing a ghost, right? And I don't know, right? It's my initial thought is that, like, what is supposed to be scary about this and very, very terrifying about this is that it is what is not seen or not described, which is the most fearful part, right? And this kind of, it gets drawn out at a couple different points, right? But it is very much the gothic horror, and it is very much the eldritch horror of it all, of that our governess, whose name I cannot remember, is seeing snippets of things, but our and seeing these two ghosts periodically, but supposedly the children are seeing way more. So yeah, like, and that's supposed to be this scary part about all of this, right? Is that the children, Miles and Flora, are seeing these ghosts constantly, communicating with these ghosts constantly, and there's nothing that the adults can do to stop it, right? That's what's supposed to be scary about all of this, right? Yeah, and to me, it just doesn't quite land, right? Because mean, I had to look this up because it was very clearly like I'm missing something here. And so I had to do some basic preliminary research before filming this of my initial interpretation of this, and what is generally considered the more modern interpretation of this is that our caretaker and our governess is the one that's actually, she's the only one seeing these ghosts. And the children aren't seeing them at all, right? Which it goes into this whole thing of like it is a parental thing, right? And it is a thing that happens whenever we start to view children as ours, or take ownership of children. It is that, and this specifically went with the constant descriptions of Miles, of the refusal to believe that our children can do anything bad, or can be poorly, without some sort of malintended negative influence, right? And so we end up with this thing of like the entire story ends up being framed around that Miles was expelled from school and was suddenly sent home, and no one wants to really approach the topic, and so we end up with just this kind of mystery of how this child that is seemingly perfect and at the house was also completely expelled from a school, which would have been pretty difficult to do, especially without like the expulsion doesn't have any actual details involved with it, right? And so to me that becomes like the thing that's actually happening here, is that it is this story of our caretaker, who now being in the possession of these children, now taking ownership of these children and raising them and being in control of them, needing to find a reason as to why these children are acting up or are being bad at some points, right? Where this obviously falls apart is in descriptions of the ghosts, right? Which in of itself, right, the ghosts are, it's Peter Quint and Miss, I think it's like Miss Tully, Miss Jessel, in which it's like this, the descriptions that are given when our caretaker sees the ghosts are vague enough that that Mrs. Grouse, I think is her name, Grouse, some Grohl, who it starts with a G, who is the housekeeper, makes the connection of who they are, right? But we don't get any actual confirmation as to who these ghosts actually are and what these ghosts truly fully look like, because the only description we ever get is from our caretaker, right? And so it's like, you know, yeah. And so, and because of that, like, it just doesn't provoke any sort of response for me, unfortunately, which is a shame, because it's a very well beloved, well critiqued book, and novella. So that's that. Certainly there's a whole bunch of stuff about class in here, right? You have the wealthiest person in all of this, who takes over in raising the niece and the nephew, and he has no interest in raising them whatsoever, and so decides that he's going to live a bachelor life in London and just hire women to go take care of this house and take care of this country and take care of the children, right? But then you end up with this weird thing of where, I shouldn't say it's a weird thing, but this thing in this class and societal and patriarchy and versus matriarchy kind of cycle, in which you are dealing with the fact that despite the fact that the children are being raised pretty much exclusively by women, and that our caretaker and our housekeeper have basically total control and total say over how these children get raised, they still have to go through this authority that knows nothing about them simply because he is the man of the house. And even though he does not live there, even though that he has nothing to do with these children, he gives explicit instructions to our caretaker about not bothering him with anything. But they still have to go through him and attempt to resolve these issues, right? Which is this to me kind of speaks to this fear and just this overall idea or issues of living in a patriarchal society in which things are inherently owned by men and controlled by men, and yet women are asked to do the majority of the labor and the raising of those things, right? And that's concerning in a lot of ways, right? So that's that. Within that also, you also have the way the entire story is framed, right? The entire story is framed in which, and it doesn't make sense as to why it is framed this way, other than the only explanation I can give is that this was initially written as a serial, I don't know for which newspaper or magazine, but it was initially written as a serial. And so the first chapter is an unnamed narrator talking to an unnamed college graduate during a Christmas Eve, and like, oh, I'm going to tell a ghost story, and then our unnamed college graduate is like, well, I don't know how truthful it is because it's written by a woman. I don't know how it's not that great of a story, so I'm gonna have to reword huge chunks of it. But then it also just goes into becomes this whole thing of like, we are hearing this woman's story and this fear that she has, and yet we're not actually hearing it from here. We are hearing the interpretation of what she has written from someone else, right? Which is just this kind of weird kind of thing that's going on here. But then we also don't go back to it at the end, right? The story just ends with the young boy Miles dying in her caretaker's arms, or in his caretaker's arms, and like it's just, but then we don't go back to this whole thing of this is a story being told by someone else about what has happened. So like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense there, and I don't quite understand as to why it was written in this form, other than possibly because you need a hook for the serial to go, hey, this is gonna be what's happening in this section for the next couple of weeks, or the next month. So I don't know. I just simply did not enjoy this very much, unfortunately, which is a shame because it's a short read and it's critically acclaimed, and yet here we are. So that's The Turn of the Screw by Henry James.